Biblical Insights with Bob. Once again, during this epidemic, I'm home alone with my wife, and Michael's not able to help us with the production, so we're working alone tonight. Several years ago, I did a series on the book of Isaiah, but I stopped with Isaiah 59. And I've often wanted to get back and look at the last 7 chapters of that book because it looks at the future of Israel. Now, Isaiah, you remember, prophesied about and during the time of the Babylonian captivity in 586 BC. A couple of the other major prophets were prophesying about that same time. But anyway, this was 586 BC. He was looking ahead thousands of years, actually, as many of the prophets do. So I want to look at it maybe a little bit like Isaiah looked at it. Since this is a prophecy, I think we need to look at the way we interpret prophecy. Now, in his commentary on Isaiah, Jeffrey Grogan suggests that there are 2 ways to interpret prophecies. The first is literally. In other words, everything that the prophet says is a literal thing, or nearly everything. In other words, we need to look at it literally as much as possible. The second way is looking at everything through a spiritual interpretation. Everything they saw has a spiritual meaning, not necessarily literal. So those are the basically 2 ways. In his summary on the book, as an introduction of his commentary, Grogan says, "We're never promised complete understanding of the biblical prophecies before their fulfillment." In other words, nobody can really say until we see them fulfilled. The main purpose is to keep us, now listen to the main purpose is to keep us expectant, obedient, and trustful, and to provide in their fulfillment evidence of the faithfulness of God in His Word. In the fulfilled events themselves, God will be seen to be true. Now, there's another statement I read from another commentator, J. Alexander, that I like maybe even a little better than Grogan's. Alexander says, "Here, as elsewhere, the new dispensation is contrast as a whole with everything before it. We're not therefore to seek fulfillment of the prophecy in any one period of history exclusively, nor to consider the actual corruptions and afflictions as inconsistent with the splendid vision of the New Jerusalem presented here by the prophet, not in its successive stages, but in one grand panoramic view." I like that. In other words, as Isaiah saw the future, he didn't see a timeline. He didn't say this is going to happen and this and this. He saw a grand view. It's kind of looking at a mountain range and trying to tell him which one comes first. And so, as we read this, at least this beginning of the 60th chapter, let's look at it kind of from that angle. Now, as I read and study, I see shades of messianic prophecy. Indeed, he is the light. Now, Isaiah starts out, "Arise and shine, for your light has come." Now, when did that light come? John says, "And the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not." Speaking about the light of the world, Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." And so I think that part, the very first, is speaking of the light. Your light has come. So you see, it's kind of an overview, a panorama, and Isaiah's seeing it. So as I read this chapter 60, especially the first section, I believe that we've been watching its fulfillment in my lifetime. Several times I'll mention a book that I purchased a few years ago titled God's Promise and the Future of Israel. This book seems to be a literal fulfillment. See, most of the commentaries we use in our Bible study were written before 1948. Many of them go back to the Reformation and hundreds of years ago. But this fulfillment that I want to talk about tonight began in 1948, where this literal fulfillment really started to take place. So the focus of this chapter is Israel's prominence, a position of prominence among the nations of the future. The poem kind of centers around this theme that God spoke to Abraham when he said that I will bless those who bless you and curse those that curse you. So we're looking at the nations now with Israel as a center point. So let's read the first 9 verses. That's probably as far as we'll get today. Isaiah says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes round about and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons," now note, "your sons will come from afar, and your daughters will be carried in the arms. Then you will see and be radiant, and your heart will thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea will be turned to you, and the wealth of the nations will come to you. A multitude of camels will cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah, and those from Sheba will come. They will bring gold and frankincense, and they will bear good news of the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar will be gathered together to you. The rams of Naboth will minister to you. They will go up with acceptance on my altar, and I shall glorify my glorious house. Who are these that fly like a cloud and like the doves to their lattices? Surely the coastlands will wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish will come first to bring your sons from afar, their silver and their gold with them. For the name of the Lord your God, and for the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you." Remember, he's talking now to Israel. Now, in looking at these first 9 verses, I know that there are several prophecies that haven't been fulfilled at this time. But let's keep in mind Alexander's statement. It's a panorama. Several things have happened in my lifetime that I remember, I believe could be referred to in this passage. In Dr. Finner's book, he reminds us of the intersection of promise and timing. He says, within the past 60 years, now this book, by the way, was written in 2006, in the past 60 years, 2 historical events that have brought about the fulfillment of biblical promises and have changed the course of natures. That's what we're talking about in this passage. Number 1, he says, were the birth of the state of Israel in 1948, and second, the recapture of Jerusalem in the Six-Day War of 1967. Now, I said, I remember some of these things happened. I was 9 years old in 1948 when Israel was declared homeland for the Jews. Now, you remember after that there was fighting and there was resentment and battles happening. So a couple of years later, I was delivering newspapers in Syracuse, Indiana. And I'll never forget, on that one Christmas season, on the front page of that day's newspaper was a picture of an Israeli soldier in a trench. The headline said, "There is no peace on earth in Israel." It was a Christmas season. And that picture and that newspaper has stayed in my mind as vivid as it was the day I saw it. For I knew then that this was prophecy coming true. Now, let's look at verse 4. It reads, "Your sons will come from afar, and your daughters will be carried in their arms." In Finto's next chapter, he states that on May 24th, 1991, 34 LL C-130 Hercules airlifted 14,325 Ethiopian Jews in a well-executed operation called Operation Solomon. Seats even were removed from the aircraft to maximize passenger capacity. According to Pastor Gerald Ganson, who'd worked in Ethiopia since the days of Emperor Haile Selassie, there was one particular plane in which the passengers were meticulously counted as they left Addis Ababa, only to find when they arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel that the passenger count had been increased by 10. 10 babies had been born during the flight. Now, by the way, notice that in verse 8, the comment, "Who are those who fly like a cloud?" Now, could this be a reference to the aircraft used here? Now, look ahead then. We looked at verse 8 here. Now look at verse 9. "And the ships of Tarshish will come first to bring your sons from afar, their silver and their gold with them, for the name of the Lord your God, for the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you." Here again, Reverend Finto gives us this insight. In 1993, he's talking about people now within a group he was part of. This group traveled to Greece to speak with a shipping magnate about leasing an entire ship for the Aliyah. That's the term used for the Jewish return to the land. However, the magnate said, "We do not have a ship for you," kind of shrugged it off. "Yes, you do," returned Steve Lytle's Prophetic company. "The Lord told us you have one." "Well, we do have a ship," he admits, "but it's not where you need it. It's not in Russia." "Then where is it?" "It's in Tarshish." Tarshish is generally assumed to be in Spain. And they replied, "That's the very one we want." Thinking of this, the ships from Tarshish. Thus, the first ship was used exclusively for those new Russian immigrants. So, in these chapters, Reverend Finto gives several other examples how prophecy was fulfilled during that period of time. That's looking at the 80s and 90s. Now, during this period of time from 1948 on, and particularly I think about 1980, I remember very well, as many of you also remember, the rise of the Jesus people. Remember that? At the time of the Jewish ministries like Jews for Jesus that seemed to have come out of the Jesus movement. And then from them, Zola Levitt and several other messianic ministries. When my wife and I first started our study of the Jewish roots of Christianity was in 1983, right in this period, you see. because it was during this time that there was a growing interest in the Jewish roots of Christianity. I don't think any of this was a coincidence. I think it's a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. This resulted in many Jewish Christians. Now, I went to Jews for Jesus website and asked the question, how many Messianic Jews are there in Israel today? And the answer came back. There's a community of approximately 20,000 Messianic Jews, as reported by the Messianic Jewish community. I believe there's more. They're a little reluctant to publish their numbers. So you see, it all began in this time period. It began way back 72 years ago. We just last week celebrated the 72nd anniversary of that time that Israel became a nation. So in the last 72 years, we've seen this happen. So we can see that Isaiah was not showing a timeline for prophecy, but as Alexander states, it was a panorama of God's plan. Now, maybe that's a hint as how we should look at prophecy today, not trying to set dates and define every detail, but just to do as Jesus tells us, watch, be alert. Now, look again at verse 1. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Could it be, thinking back, could it be that if the religious leaders of that first century had recognized that light as Jesus, the light of the world, and not understanding that the Messiah was Ben Joseph or the son of Joseph and not Ben David, as they were expecting the Messiah who would deliver them from the bondage? Could it be if they'd understood and just watched that their future might have been different? I think it's a challenge to us to watch what's happening, not necessarily set dates when this is going to happen or when this is going to happen, but watch, be alert. That's what Jesus warned us to do. So as we leave this particular study, that's my hope, that's my challenge, to be alert, to watch, and see how prophecy unfolds, continues to unfold in my lifetime. I believe we're living in a very symbolic time. I believe as we're watching what's going on in our world today, I won't set times, but I think we need to continue to watch, be alert. The glory of the Lord has come. Well, thank you for being with me for this short time of thinking about the fulfillment of prophecy. We'll come back to Isaiah 60 and maybe do a more detailed study of some of the things there. But I wanted to kind of get an overview and look at this idea of Isaiah seeing a panorama of God's unfolding. And that's what we're seeing today. Thank you for being with us. Hope you'll join us again soon as we continue.